Morning, everyone. How's it going? Woo, super stoked to be here. So, a little bit about me. That's me. That's my face. That's my website. That's my Twitter handle. Follow me. What's up? Yeah, cool. So I work at TWG. TWG is an awesome company. It's a little agency. I'm a developer there. Do all sorts of really, really cool stuff. I'm also the content lead at Ladies Learning Code, where we run little workshops to help youth and women get involved with technology from a practical standpoint, and really dive into coding and practice and learn and just get exposed to the world of development. I'm also an instructor at HackerU, which focuses on part-time workshops, part-time courses, and a full-time boot camp that helps people deep dive further into web development and potentially even switch careers. I know there's a whole bunch of HackerU people out there like, oh, hi. Amazing. So I just wanted to point out that I get really, really excited when I'm talking about technology. When I'm excited, I talk really fast. And when I'm excited, I swear a lot also. And I'm not kidding, like I swear a lot, like a lot. I'm really going to try my best not to, considering this is way more formal than what I'm used to. But I apologize ahead of time if I drop a couple of things here and there. I'm sorry. I also have an extremely unhealthy obsession with Emma Watson. She shows up everywhere, and I use her for all of my code examples. So yes, be prepared for that also. All right, so what we will be talking about today, we'll talk about where we were in regards to front-end development, HTML, CSS, where we are today, the limitations that exist today, the swag that is Flexbox, what it is, how it works, and then we'll be looking at a few examples, and then sort of a bit of forward thinking. Sweet, so Tim, 1980, decides to come up, just a sec, my presenter notes, I'm sorry, there we go, cool. So in 1980, Tim comes up with the first hypertext system, which would later on become HTML. I was -9. I was hella stoked. I was like, oh, this shit's the best. Then in 1990, that turned into proper HTML, and the first web browser prototype was created at CERN. It was pretty sweet. In 1996, CSS is born. Oh my God. Oh snap. CSS is amazing. This was about to change my world forever, and I did not even know this. So this is what the web used to look like. This is one of Amazon's first websites. Hot damn. Hot damn. That looks so sexy. We're now in 2015, and we've come a very, very long way. It's pretty awesome. Especially with regards to layouts. Layouts have changed drastically and dramatically since 1996 when CSS first came out. So originally, a whole bunch of stuff was built with tables. There were a couple presentations yesterday that showed little code snippets. There was one, I forget who it was, who showed the code snippet or a screenshot of the Space Jam website, fully built in tables back in '97. It looked hella dope. But tables are the worst if you're not building stuff for tabular data. We've all come to hate tables for that. Then came floats. Everyone misused the shit out of floats. Floats became the new way to deal with positioning and laying things out on your website. Then came inline block, and people started to misuse inline block too. And that's one of my favorite ways to handle layouts personally. And a lot of people who aren't super comfortable with HTML, CSS, who are just like diving into web dev, say this a lot. They're like, layouts are hard. Layouts are hard. I don't understand what clearfix is. What the hell is clearfix? And the thing is, I don't think it's hard. I think layouts are just a little bit tricky. And the reason why they're tricky is because all the ways that we currently implement layouts are all technically hacks. Floats were not intended to be used for layouts, and neither was inline block. So we've got clearfix for floats, we've got dealing with ghost space for inline block, then that's just a pain in the ass. No one knows how to, no one remembers why, no one really, most developers can't really explain what clearfix is doing. If you kind of explain, like, here's this code snippet of clearfix, what does it do? They're like, I don't know, I just know how to use it. So it's they weren't intended to be used to create layouts. That's not what they were built for. So, even within, we're able to do a whole bunch with those, but there's still limitations. Floats get us quite far, so does inline block. It's amazing. They have their limitations, and we'll have a look at some of that now. So let's look at some of that yuckiness that exists with layouts today. Vertical centering. Surprise, surprise. We've thrown people out of space. but we still can't vertically align something in CSS. That's disgusting. That just makes me really, really sad. Sticky footers. What do I mean by sticky footers? So here's an example of a website. You see that footer. When there's not enough content, it just decides to hang out halfway up the page. That looks kind of silly. Ideally, this thing should be sitting at the bottom, and once there's enough content on the page, it just starts scrolling as per usual. That's another limitation that there's some weird hacks around it. People use JavaScript to deal with this, or use a weird table hack to do this. Not super nice, not super fun. Then we have something called the Holy Grail layout. Who's heard of the Holy Grail layout? Ooh, yeah. So the Holy Grail layout talks about something like this, where you've got a fixed height for your header and for your footer that both span edge to edge. You've got fixed widths for both of your sidebars, and then your main content area that constantly readjusts based on the amount of space that it has left. And the important thing to remember for that middle row of stuff, your main content needs to appear first in your HTML because it's like the juicy stuff. It has a higher precedence. It should just appear first in the markup out of those three things. So these are just some of the issues that developers face today when they're using inline blocks and floats and tables, I hope not, when it comes to doing layouts. And sometimes we feel like this. We're like trying, it's working, we're slicing the bread, but it's not being sliced very nicely. We could do a better job. And thank goodness for Flexbox. Oh my goodness. So the Flexbox layout module was created to allow us to build more efficient and really, really sexy layouts. It's more complex than just using floats and inline block, but it's more flexible. Sorry, I had to. It's definitely less hacky. It was built specifically for this, which is fantastic. Eric Mayer was super, super excited in 2013. He was like, oh man, if you think you're excited, you're not. Like, you need to be more excited. And he was right. Like, my mind was blown when I first dived into Flexbox, and it's super, super amazing. So, obviously, we have to talk about browser support. Can I have some? Yeah, kind of, ish, sort of. For the most part, the browsers are doing pretty well. Like, we've got great support across the board. But surprise, surprise, good old IE. For the most part, working for various companies, various clients, we sometimes have to support IE8, sometimes IE9, and that ends up being the biggest limitation for us today. If you check out Can I Use, pretty good across the board, except for that darn IE, but that's okay. With Edge coming out and staying evergreen, hopefully IE9 and IE8 and 9 will start phasing out even more, and then we'll be able to use the magic that is Flexbox. But until then, sad face. I recently got to work on a project for the Global Mail. It was an iOS app that was going to have a whole bunch of web views inside. And I realized, oh, hey, the only browser that we're technically supporting at this point is Safari 7.1 and up, which means that it's got Flexbox support, and we got to use Flexbox to build really cool layouts. I was very, very excited. And this is what I looked like when I was doing workout. It was amazing. I was like, oh, yeah, just having the best time. This is fantastic. So let's talk about the property definition of Flexbox. When was it created? 2009. And since then, it's gone through a whole bunch of change. It started off by just being box dash, then it switched to display Flexbox, and then it finally switched to display Flex. So it changed multiple times over a really, really short duration of time. And now, like for the next little while, if we're planning on supporting all these versions of browsers that supported these older definitions, our CSS ends up looking something like this, which is kind of bananas. It's disgusting. Like, no one wants to write this just to get started with using Flexbox. And this is excluding all the Mozilla extensions. This is just for WebKit and for Microsoft. For Internet Explorer. So I would highly, highly recommend using Auto Prefixer, 100%. If you're planning on using Flexbox, please, please, please use Auto Prefixer. Otherwise, you will want to jump out a window. All right, so there's lack of support beyond just browsers. I was working on a project for TSN. We were about to do some really, really awesome scroll magic stuff. There's a library called Scroll Magic. And Scroll Magic needs to detect the size and positioning of elements. And we were planning on using Flexbox because the browser support was IE10 and up, but Scroll Magic was not capable of detecting sizes and positioning of items laid out using Flexbox. So you need to keep that in mind also, that certain libraries that haven't, updated the way they work may not also support Flexbox. So that's another consideration that you need to keep in mind when you're working on this stuff. All right, so there's four main concepts, four initial concepts that you need to look at before you're about to dive into Flexbox. The first one is the Flex container. So there's a Flex container, you've got a div that's going to hold a whole bunch of other stuff, or whatever item that ends up being. So that's your Flex container, and the things inside are your Flex items, or Flex children. Then you have your main axis. Your main axis is the direction in which your main items, your Flex items flow. And then you have your cross axis, which is perpendicular to your main axis. So those are the four main concepts that you need to know before diving into Flexbox. All right, so we're either going to end up applying CSS to the container or to the items. It's always one or the other. Let's have a look at some of these CSS properties, what they do, how they work, what to apply them on, and what the different properties exist for those specific CSS stuffs. So first we've got display flex. This is where the magic happens. You apply display flex to your Flex container, and boom, you're in business. This is the magic. Not this magic. I wish that magic. But that's okay. That's okay. Sweet. Then we've got something called flex direction. Flex direction is now one of the first properties that we can start using for Flexbox. Once again, you apply this on your Flex container. This allows you to set the direction or the flow of your Flex items. This is defining your main axis, whether it's left to right, right to left, or column-wise. So we have Flex direction row, left to right. Then we have row, what do we see? Perfect, so Flex direction row. Then we've got Flex direction row reverse, which makes it go the other way, from right to left. Then we've got column, and then we've got column reverse also. So that's your Flex direction. Then we've got justify content. This controls how your content or how your Flex items should align or justify themselves along the main axis of your Flex container. So the first option that we have, this is the default property, justify content Flex start. This aligns them all to the start of your container, to the start of your main axis. Then we've got Flex end, aligns it to the end. Then we've got center. We've got space between, so it sort of grabs the last two elements, pushes them all the way to the end, and spaces all the other ones out evenly. Or we've got space around, which separates out all that space that exists in and around, even on the sides, the extreme ends of your Flex items. Pretty cool. Then we've got Flex wrap. Flex wrap, once again, also applies to your Flex container. This controls the behavior of your Flex items when you're manipulating your viewport. When you're resizing the screen's width, your browser's width, this is what controls how those items need to react. The default property for, the default value for Flex wrap is no wrap. So when you've got a whole bunch of items and there's not enough space, they don't move down to the next line, they just squish. That sometimes causes your content to flow out of those containers, so you have to either throw in some scroll bars or deal with those. But this is the default property. And sometimes it's awesome. Sometimes that's exactly what you need. Then we've also got Flex wrap. If your items don't fit, move them to the next line. This is probably the most common way we've seen inline items work or float items work when we're working with CSS today. Then we also have wrap reverse. I can't say I've used this. This is very strange, but it exists. If you use it, please tell me. I would love to see the use case for this. Anyways, align items, also something else that we apply to the Flex container. This controls how your items are laid out on the cross axis. So not the main axis, but the cross axis. By default, the align items has a stretch property. It has a value of stretch, sorry. So it stretches out all of those Flex items to the height of their container. And this throws people off sometimes. They're like, what the hell is going on with my stuff right now? Everything just looks really crazy. And this is, because we haven't written align item stretch, this is just like the default property. It kind of throws people off. So it's important to keep this in mind, that we might want to replace this or override this with something else. And the most common one that I end up overriding this with is align items Flex start. Just says, hey, you know what? Nope. Don't stretch them. Just let them be as big as they need to be and just take up as much space as needed. None of this stretchy craziness. Flex start. Then we've got Flex end, so it aligns it to the bottom of your cross axis. Then we've got align item center. Super nice. Aligns them vertically. We'll get to that again in a sec. So easy. What? Then we've got align content. Aligned content, once again, you apply to your Flex container. And this controls how multiple things, how your Flex items react when there's multiple rows of them, when there's more than just one line of Flex items. How do they behave when you've got 2 lines or 3 lines of Flex items? How does the spacing work around them? The default property for aligned content is stretch. So when you have 2 rows of content, they'll figure out how much space is there, they'll split it in half or in however many chunks that they need depending on the number of rows you have, and stretch those items out to that amount of space, which is pretty nice. Always makes it like perfectly magical. It's like, very fancy. Maybe we don't want this. We can use something called flex start instead. Just says, hey, align all of them to the top. This is sort of the most traditional way of doing layouts. Pretty nice. We also have flex end, aligns them to the bottom of your cross axis. Then we also have center. Very nice. Moves them all to the center. The entire group of them, regardless of the number, regardless of whether it's just 1 line or 5 lines of items, centers all of those lines of content into the center of your Flex container. Then we've got space between. So this is sort of similar to what we saw before. It grabs the first item, aligns it all the way to the top. The last row of content aligns it right to the bottom, and then spaces everything else out in between. And then space around also. This takes the amount of space that's available and evenly distributes it above, below, and in between all of the rows. All right. Now we start applying some properties to the Flex items. One of the coolest properties is order. We're able to control the sequence in which those items appear on screen. It doesn't manipulate or change the ordering in which those items appear in your HTML. You can have them appear a specific way, but then be written in a specific way in your HTML, but then display or show up on screen in a different sequence using the CSS property order. So for example, I've got a whole bunch of divs or a bunch of elements, and I can give them an order value, and this is just like a whole number, and these can be negative numbers also, and I can control what sequence these items appear in. So you can say, this one shows up right in the beginning, this one has a -1, this one has a 3. This allows you to do some really, really cool stuff when you're working with breakpoints. When you want something to appear at the top, but on a smaller tablet, like on a tablet device or a mobile device, you want things to start shifting around. That's one of the biggest asks from designers sometimes when they're working with really, really cool layouts, trying to push the boundaries, do something a little bit more different. And we're always like, sorry, but now we can, and it's great. Order allows us to do that, and it's fantastic. Then we also have align self. So we've looked at aligning all the items in one go when we've been applying that CSS property to the Flex container. But sometimes you want to just control the alignment of one item inside a Flex container. And that's what align self allows us to do. So for example, I can say align self Flex start. By default, everything has an alignment of stretch. But I can say, nope, this particular fella, I want it to have a align self of Flex start. We can also say flex end, center, just to have that particular item centered, or stretch, which is just the default. Awesome. Then we've got flex grow. This says, hey, this allows us to control the ability of whether or not an item is going to grow if necessary, and if the space exists. So it's sort of weird to look at this. Normally, we're accustomed to using grids or some sort of column-based layouts. And this sort of throws that convention out the window somehow. And you have to really, really wrap your head around doing everything in fractions or in percentages. So for example, in this case, I'm saying that that third element is twice the size of all the other basic elements. That's a little bit weird. You have to sort of be like, wait, what? So how wide is it? It automatically figures out how wide it needs to be depending on the number of elements that exist. So if you throw in another element, it'll readjust. All those widths will get recalculated. It'll always remain twice the width of all the other elements. And you can just keep on incrementing that number and do some really, really cool layout stuff. And you need no grid system at all. You don't have to bring in Bootstrap or any other grid system that you use. Just a whole bunch of flex grow values, which is kind of nice. It kind of throws people off sometimes, but it's really, really cool. And I highly recommend experimenting with it. Then we've got flex shrink, which is the exact opposite of flex grow. So I'll be showing a code example of this in a bit to show you how that works. And the last property that we'll be looking at is flex basis. Flex basis says, what's the default size of this element? Think of this as applying the width on an item, the starting width of an item. By default, the flex basis for all things is set to auto. They're automatically just figuring out how wide or how big or tall they need to be. You can define that width and say, you know what, when you start off, I want you to be 400 pixels wide. And then you can either grow or shrink depending on whether or not you need to and whether or not the space around you is sufficient for you to do what you need to do. Now, as in CSS, there's always a whole bunch of shorthands. All three of those properties, flex grow, flex shrink, and flex basis, have been combined together into the flex property. So this is a pretty nice shorthand. You can just say flex, and then provide the grow value, the shrink value, and then the basis value all in one go. It's kind of nice. The default property for flex is 1, 0 auto. So the 1 is for grow, meaning yes, grow if need be. 0 says, nope, don't shrink beyond a specific size, and auto says automatically figure out your size. This is kind of weird. It's a little confusing. Definitely try it out. Definitely play around with it, and I'll show you a couple examples of this in a bit also. And another short form of that line is just saying flex 1. It's like, wait, what? Like it's really weird. There's so many short forms for flex. Personally, I like to use this or declare all of them individually just because I still get tripped up sometimes. I'm like, whoa, this is way too condensed. I took 3 lines and turned them into flex 1. That's a little confusing. So before we get into a couple examples, I just wanted to point out a few resources. Chris Koya, surprise, surprise, the genius that he is, he's got an amazing guide on his website for Flexbox that deep dives into all of these properties. I highly recommend checking that out. There's also a developer in the States named Joni Baloney, who's got this amazing document that sort of has a series of questions. And you answer that question, and depending on the question that you, do you want to align this way? Yes or no? And depending on that answer, she provides the CSS properties that you need to apply to your container or to your item. It's really, really, really cool. It really helps understand the Flexbox properties, especially when you're first getting started. And then one of my instructor coworkers at HackerU put together a video series called What the Flexbox. I highly recommend checking that out too. It's free, and it's amazing. All right, so we're going to have a look at a couple coding examples just to show you 3 different ways of how Flexbox has helped me in the past and has been super amazing. All right, I remember I need to, oh no, this is great. Oh, I need to mirror the displays. All right, all right. Sweet, so on my left, I've got this in my browser. Yes, I do. So I've got 4 divs here. They've just got different colors so we can differentiate between them, and they've got a height and width, just basic stuff. And what I want to do is, this is sort of a very high-level or super watered-down version of how you might build in navigation. It's very, very common to see a nav bar that's got your branding on one side, your H1 or your logo, and then all of your actual links on the other side. And we've had to use grids or floats or columns or a whole bunch of really weird ways to get those to align the way we want them to. So instead, what I want to do is I want to first just apply display flex on the entire container. So that's my flex container. And then I've got my items. So just by applying display flex, let's see what happens. It just starts applying all those default values to your your flex container and your flex items. One of the coolest things we can do is we can grab a specific item. So in this case, I'm grabbing item number 2, and I'm applying a margin left of auto. And what that allows us to do is that space is automatically figured out, and those items are split up, and now we have that navigation that we've always wanted. And it took me just 2 lines of code to do that. No columns, no grids, no floats, no clear fix. Fantastic. And it works incredibly well. And, of course, super responsive. All righty. Example number 2. Example number 2. I've got this div. It's got some text. It's got a width of 50%. It's always changing. It's got some padding too. And I want this to be vertically aligned and center aligned also. Of course I do. Everyone wants this. all the time. And we've needed some crazy-ass, disgusting ways to do this. So first and foremost, display flex on my container to activate Flexbox. Amazing. Let's have a look at what it does. So this is that default stretch property that it's applying. We don't want that. We'll be changing that. So what we want to do is we want to do two alignments. We want to align the item in the center on the main axis and then also on the cross axis. So both of those have their separate CSS properties. So justify content center is the alignment of that item on the main axis. And align item center is the alignment on the cross axis. So just by applying those two CSS properties on the Flex container, that item is now perfectly centered. And the best thing I like about this is that the centering is always perfect. Like the width can change of the item, the amount of space around it can change. We never get any weird issues. It's just, it's so nice. It's so nice. Fantastic. All right, and last example, we're going to have a look at the Holy Grail layout and see what that looks like. So I've got 5 divs here. I've got my header, content, navigation, some ad space, and a footer. And if I have a look at my actual code, my markup, notice how inside my site body div, I've got 3 items. I've got my site content first. This is one of the requirements of the Holy Grail layout, that your site content needs to appear first in your markup, then your navigation and your ad space. Sweet. And then we've got our footer at the bottom. Awesome. So, there we go. So I've got some default colors and stuff. The first thing we want to do is we want to grab that entire container. We want to display flex, so we can activate Flexbox. Then we want to change the default direction of flow. We want to change the main axis. Instead of being from left to right, we want to change it from top to bottom, because we want to have the header appear first, then the site body, and then the footer. And then I just gave it a default min height, just so we can see it take some space up. All right, so nothing really changes, because we had just set our flex direction to be a column, which is what we have right now. Awesome. Then we start getting into our site body, which also needs to be display flex. So we've got a flex container inside another flex container. Trippy. And what we're doing here is we're saying, hey, we want those things to be we want that little row of those 3 items to be a Flexbox, a flex container also. And now we're going to play around with the sizing of those elements. Sweet. So site content, the actual juicy stuff in the middle, we're setting the flex value to 1, which is that 1, 0 auto. We're saying, hey, constantly keep on adjusting your size depending on the available space. If I say flex content, it just starts growing. It's like, oh, there's some space left over in this row or in this space. I'm going to take it. And it continuously keeps on growing. It continuously just adjusts itself. What we want to do for the navigation sidebar and the ad space sidebar is give them a specific width. We don't want them to continuously keep adjusting. So we're setting their flex property to 0 for their grow, 0 for their shrink, and 200 pixels for their basis. So that's applying a fixed width to those items and doesn't shrink them. It's not percentage based. So if I have a look at this now, both of these didn't really shift too much, but they're now fixed at 200 pixels. So if I resize this, their width remains the same, and the content, because it has its flex set to 1, 0 auto, it continuously takes up the remaining amount of space and just grows according to the available space that it has. And the last thing that we want to do is we want to have the content to be in the middle. We don't want the contents to be the first item. We want the navigation to be the first thing. So this is where that order property comes in for the flex items. We can apply site navigation. We can give the site navigation an order of -1. And we can say, hey, I want you to appear before the other elements in that row. And your navigation appears first. And finally, the Holy Grail layout is possible with Flexbox. All right. Back to the slide deck. And I just broke stuff. Oh, we're good. All right, so the future looks fantastic. Especially now that Flexbox is supported on so many browsers. More and more people are adopting Flexbox and using it. Adobe, if you look at some of their code on their website, they're switching more and more over to Flexbox. They're like, IE9, whatever. And a whole bunch of their stuff across their websites are now switching over to using Flexbox. For those of you who follow what's happening in the world of Bootstrap, on August 19th, it was their 4th birthday. And they also announced that they're releasing Bootstrap 4, and Bootstrap 4 was also going to have an option to turn on and off Flexbox. So you could generate the entire Flexbox grid system using Flexbox instead, which is the coolest, because that means you can do a whole bunch of really awesome alignment stuff, vertical centering, all the things that we talked about today using Bootstrap going forward whenever it comes out. The beta is already available, so you can test it out and stuff. More and more mobile apps are adopting web views and writing HTML and CSS for particular pages. Because they're mobile devices, they don't need to worry about IE 8 and 9, sorry, so they're using Flexbox, which is amazing. I know Instagram, I believe, is doing that. The Global Mail app did that, and we're, at work, we're going to be doing that for all the other iOS apps that we get to work on. So there's always a few people who are like, I don't want to learn anything new. I'm perfectly fine the way I am. And I'm just going to say, Emma would be disappointed in you. And I would be too. And some people say, I manage fine without it. I'm perfectly capable of doing the stuff that I need just by using floats or inline block. I don't need this. Or I just use tables, and I'm not talking to you anymore. But, I'm perfectly capable and perfectly fine doing layouts the way I do. And the thing is, okay, fine, sure, if you insist. But the thing that really excites me is when there's new tools available, new things to play around with, that leads to new learnings. When there's new learnings, it leads to new potential. You start to see different things that are possible now. New potential leads to new ideas. And at work especially, we really, really advocate our designers to understand web development and be able to code a little bit themselves. So as they understand the limitations or the new features that are available for the web, they're able to push those boundaries and push the web further and further and push their designs further. And that bridges the gap between what's capable from a design standpoint and from a front-end development standpoint even more. Because the worst thing is when a designer is like, oh, hey, just vertically align this in the center. And you're like, can't do that, and just give you a really judgmental look. They're like, bunch of noobs. But now we're like, hey, look, we can, and they understand this too, and it's awesome. So there's more magic, and hopefully more Emma Watson too. Thank you. So I've got 8 minutes or so for any questions. Yes. Right. So when the Holy Grail layout came out, it was just one of those requirements because they insisted that the content has a higher precedence than the navigation. It has the higher importance. Therefore, it should appear first in the HTML. I mean, whether or not that still stands today, like you mentioned, when you're tabbing through content, you ideally want it to reflect the visual, the HTML needs to reflect what you're seeing on screen. Totally, I get that. That was just one of those things. The Holy Grail layout concept's been around for a while, and people have been trying to achieve that for so long, and now people are just excited that they can. They're like, hey. Whether or not you end up using it, that's something entirely different. Yes?
When you just support, say, IE9 for an internal user base, but you want to try this out, would you do that, or would you just try to target IE9 as a separate style sheet and architect something as hacky until that you don't support that anymore?
Yeah, so I've seen a couple people who sort of do fallback support also. They'll use Modernizer and check what browser is available, and then they'll write a whole bunch of additional CSS to use inline blocks or floats or whatnot instead of Flexbox. And if you're willing to go down that route and put in that extra effort, amazing. But normally we're on super tight timelines. That's not always feasible. But on personal projects, and if you do have that timeline, then totally, that's amazing. Normally, as soon as, personally, at work, especially when we have to support IE 8 and 9, we tend not to opt for Flexbox just because we're able to focus on other things instead. Also, we don't want to develop that extra set of code to maintain and work on. And also, that just adds more code in general. So it just adds more to the CSS file and just reduces the efficiency and the speed of the website on already garbage browsers. Yeah. Yes?
Do you suggest using Flexbox for like all layout properties? Like I've heard things, people saying that there's performance implications of that. So I was curious to hear your thoughts.
So the question was, is there any performance implications of using Flexbox, and would you recommend using it on entire site layouts? So we had that concern also when we were hopping onto the Globe and Mail app. We were like, how's this going to work? We did a whole bunch of experimentation and some demoing and stuff, and it was fantastic. We built the entire thing using Flexbox. There wasn't a single thing that was laid out using not Flexbox, which is really cool. And we had no issues with performance at all. And we tried on a few older versions of tablets also, and it was working pretty cool. And we built a little sandbox on our browsers, like on our actual machines, just to like practice and play around with, and we seemed to run into no issues, which is pretty cool. So, like, I haven't seen too many concerns with performance. Like, it's been really, really good from as far as I can see. Certain times, if you've got a lot happening on your website and you load the website right away, it takes like a fraction of a second for things to be calculated and then jump into place. But I've only seen that happen on like really, really intensive websites. But for the most part, I've had no problems with it. And the cool thing with Flexbox is you don't have to build your entire website with Flexbox. If you're like, oh, hey, I just want to vertically align something, cool. Use Flexbox just for that little piece, and that's it. And it can be progressive. You don't have to jump into it and like throw floats and inline block away. Start playing around here and there, like, oh, this is kind of neat. I like this, and then just keep on expanding from there. Yep. Yes, you are. Any more questions? Got 3 more minutes. Yes?
First off, I love Flexbox, but I was just curious, you experimented with CSS display grid.
Mm-hmm.
How would you compare that to Flexbox for like some site layouts?
Cool. So another CSS property or concept called CSS grids is also emerging to handle layouts. I think we'll probably end up pairing both of those two things together. CSS grid is going to sort of manage the entire site layout. So for example, like this is my header, my sidebar, this is my main content, and then the alignment or the positioning of elements within, for example, the navigation might be Flexbox. So because Flexbox does get a little bit tricky when you start doing layouts for the entire site, CSS grid makes it extremely easy. So, but the CSS grids handles like, just like really large-scale layout concepts, and you wouldn't really want to use CSS grids for your navigation elements and things like that. So there's definitely going to be a good pairing of both of those and used in tandem for sure. I'm very excited for CSS grids. Wow. Yes? Yes, I'm going to be passing my slides off right after this chat, and FITC will take care of it. Cool. Yes?
I love this. Is awesome. One question as we try and move to the more semantic web, do you see a lot of problems kind of moving toward things like the main element and rather than divs, which don't have quite as much meat? And I know something like main has struggles to get kind of CSS support for rendering, but I'd like to start using more of those goodies in HTML5. How do you think this will play out?
So those elements are great. They work sort of exactly like divs do. So I feel like the reason why most people aren't adopting them is because they don't see a difference in them. They don't really understand their value. They're like, I don't get it. What's the point? It's just a div, just has a different name. Stop confusing me. I think it's just a matter of like educating people. It's like, what's the reasoning behind this? Why do these things exist? There's a purpose why they were created or now are included in HTML5. I think it's just a matter of like people becoming aware of them and becoming more and more understanding of their purpose and their intention. And I think I've already seen those being adopted more and more, and I think that'll just keep on growing. I think a lot of developers who've been developing for a number of years just get really comfortable developing the way they do and are really, really angry when someone suggests something else. And I'm like, hey, try inline block instead of flows. They're like, no. Just going to keep on floating stuff. And that's cool. That's that's all right. So I think, some people are just a little bit stubborn, and that's okay. I think eventually, like, the web is changing so fast that we're eventually just going to get to a point where they'll have to adapt and have to switch over to, listening to everyone else and using all of this awesome stuff that exists for us. Amazing. And I'm 20 seconds over. Thank you so much. It's been a blast.